My dear students, today in this video we will deal with another poem from the textbook of 12th standard. The title of the poem is Father Returning Home, and this poem is written by a very famous Indian poet Dilip. But before going to start the poem, we will have a short introduction to the poet. Dilip Purushottam Chitre was born in 1938 and he died in 2009. He was a well-known teacher, painter, filmmaker and magazine columnist also. He won the Sahitya Akademi Award in 1994 for his collection of poems, Ekun Kavita. He was a bilingual poet, means he wrote in Marathi as well as in English also, and mostly he wrote in Marathi. The major themes of his poems are exile, alienation, self-disintegration and death. The poems reflect cosmopolitan culture and urban sensibility. It is a free verse poem. The poem is written in free verse. Free verse means there is no regular rhyme and meter. What is meant by rhyme and meter? My dear students, we have already discussed the meaning of rhyme and meter in detail while studying the first poem, that is Song of the Open Road. If you want to get more details about the meaning of rhyme and meter, you can refer to the link given in the description box below. Then there are no limitations of using and adjusting words for the sake of rigid monotonous rhyme in free verse. It means that for the poet there is no need to adjust words for the sake of rhyme in free verse. Then the poet can express his inner powerful feelings spontaneously. As one of the greatest romantic poets, William Wordsworth, has said, poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Means the poet can express his feelings spontaneously in poetry. In the same way, in free verse also, the poet can express his inner powerful feelings spontaneously. And in free verse, this is possible because there is no limitation of rhyme and meter. Then the use of symbolism, imagery, figurative language give it a fine sense of poetry. The use of symbolism, imagery and figurative language differentiate this piece of writing from the piece of prose. Because of the usage of the symbolism, imagery and figurative language, this piece of writing, the free verse, becomes a poem and not a prose. As I told you, the poem Father Returning Home is a free verse and there are no limitations of rhyme and meter. There is no rhythm, and this symbolizes the lack of rhythm, symbolizes the uncared for life of poet's father. In this poem we see that the life of poet's father is neglected, is uncared life, and there is no rhythm in his life. And the poet has purposefully used a pre-verse to symbolize the lack of rhythm in the life of his father. The poet has purposefully used this free verse because there is no rhythm in free verse, and the lack of rhythm in free verse symbolizes the lack of rhythm in the life of his father. Then there are a number of themes in the poem. One of the most important themes of the poem is alienation of the elders in the modern age. In the modern age, man feels to be lonely. Man feels to be isolated from the rest of the world, though he lives in the world, which is surrounded by the people, he has the feeling of loneliness. Another theme is rootlessness. The life in cities like Mumbai is rootless. The father has to travel a lot for earning the bread for his family. Then isolation of old age. This is also one of the important themes. Loneliness and world weariness in modern cities like Mumbai. Metropolitan cities like Mumbai. Man feels lonely, world weary and this is one of the important themes of the poem. Then estrangement from man-made world. The man does not feel familiar in man-made world, the world which he has created, the cities which he has created, the man has created, the family, in his own family, in his own city, while living among the people, while surrounded by the people, he has the feeling of estrangement. So this is one of the most important themes of the poem. Then pathetic condition of old age. Pathetic means sad, bad condition of old aged. Then loss of historical and cultural identity. Another theme of the poem is the generation gap. The generation gap. Then the future of man in the cosmopolitan cities like Mumbai. The future of man in the cosmopolitan cities like Mumbai. This also is one of the important themes, and the setting of the poem is Mumbai. The poem Father Returning Home is taken from Traveling by Cage. It is an autobiographical poem. Autobiographical poem means the poet describes the life, the pathetic life, the isolated life of his own father. And that's why it is an autobiographical poem. But though it is an autobiographical poem, now it has gone beyond the range of autobiographical poem. Now it has become the poem for every old man who lives in cosmopolitan cities like Mumbai, and who lives a pathetic life, an isolated life, an estranged life in cities like Mumbai. So it has become the poem for every old man who suffers such pathetic condition living in cosmopolitan cities like Mumbai. It is a first person narrative poem, and it is a dramatic monologue. It is written in free verse, a 2-stanza poem. It is a 2-stanza poem, and there are 12 lines in each stanza. It means that there are 24 lines altogether in this poem. The poem depicts 2 scenes. In the first stanza, it describes the working culture. The poem describes 2 scenes of his father's life. In the first stanza, the poem describes the working culture, the hectic late night cosmopolitan city life in Mumbai of his father, and the second stanza describes the life after returning home, the life of father after returning from his work to home. So these are the two stanzas describing 2 different pictures in the life of the poet's father. Then the use of the words like unseen, soggy, falling apart, deemed, dropped, stale, estrangement, sullen suggests the gloomy mood of the poem. Now let's try to have a detailed analysis of the poem. The title of the poem is Father Returning Home, and this poem is written by an Indian poet, Dilip Chitre. Father Returning Home is perhaps one of the most famous poems by this Indian poet. It is an autobiographical poem. It is a dramatic monologue, and in this poem the poet depicts the life of aged, the life of an old person in the cities like, in the metropolitan cities like Mumbai. In fact, it is an autobiographical poem, and in this poem the poet describes the life of his own father. He describes the estrangement in the man-made world, the isolation and the world weariness of an old person, that is his father, in the modern society and in the metropolitan cities like Mumbai. It is the depiction of the picture of his own father returning home from work. The poem, we can say that the poem is a true account of the poet's father Purushottam Chitre's life in 1957 when they moved from Baroda to live in Mumbai. The poem is expressive of the poet's feelings for his father at a later stage of his life. He realized how neglected and uncared for his father was. Even after being the lone bread earner for his family. His father had been neglected by the members of his family as well as by the modern society. I told you that the poem is an autobiographical poem, but the poem Father Returning Home has gone beyond its autobiographical significance. Now this poem is an account of any aged. Now this poem is an account of any old person who lives in the metropolitan cities like Mumbai, and he is the only bread earner for his family. He does the hard work for his family, but he leads a very mundane life. He leads a very monotonous, very isolated life in this man-made world. And there is no one to take care of him. There is no one to understand his feelings. And there is no one to converse with him. The poem is a free verse and there is no rhyme and meter, and the lack of rhythm is symbolic of the lack of rhythm in the life of the poet's father also. There is no rhythm in the life of poet's father, and this is symbolized by the lack of rhythm in the poem itself. The language is easy and simple, but the use of symbolism and poetic devices like simile make this poem very interesting piece of writing. It is the first person narrative where the the speaker of this poem, the speaker in this poem is the poet himself. The poet narrates how his father returns home and what he does thereafter. My father travels on the late evening train, standing among silent commuters in the yellow light. Commuters means the passengers. In the very first line of the poem, the poet describes his father's traveling home by train. In the very first line of the poem, the poet describes his father's return journey by train from his workplace to his home. And he travels particularly by the late evening train. The late evening train shows that he has to work in the office for a long time. We get an idea how long his father might be working there. And that's why he has to work for a long time, and that's why he has to travel by the late evening train, and as he travels by the late evening train, he reaches home late. And to add to his agony, to add to his pains, he has to travel by standing. Though he works hard for the whole day, though he works for a long time, he does not find any vacant seat in the train for relaxing. The commuters in the train, the passengers in the train also are silent commuters. They are not friendly enough to have conversation with the father of the poet. They are so wrapped, they are so busy because of or in the tensions or the worries or the cares of themselves that they do not think about the old persons like the father of the poet also. They are so wrapped in their own tensions, in their own worries and cares, that they are not sympathetic. They do not have any kind of sympathy to share their seat with the old persons like the father of the poet. The yellow light also is not so cheerful. Yellow light is not a symbol of cheerfulness. The yellow light in the compartment also adds to the monotonous journey of the poet's father. Adds to the mundane journey. The yellow light adds to the mundane, the lifeless journey of the poet's father by the train. We know the yellow colors of the leaves or the yellow traffic signal. Yellow traffic signal symbolizes slow down, and the yellow color of the leaves symbolizes that they may fall off the tree anytime. And here the yellow color may be related, or the yellow color may be symbolizing the old age of the father of the poet. Suburbs slide past his unseeing eyes. Unseeing eyes. The eyes of the father are unseeing eyes. Unseeing, they are not able to see. They do not see, or they see, but they do not know what they see. It means that in simple words, the poet wants to suggest that the poet's father, the eyes of the poet's father are not interested in whatever they see outside the window or whatever they see passing by the moving train. We saw that the poet's father is traveling by train, and while traveling, the suburbs are sliding past the moving train. But the poet's father has no intention to look at those scenes, to look at those passing suburbs. He is completely unmoved by these scenes because he has seen those scenes, those passing suburbs many times in his journey, and that's why he does not find anything new or interesting in them. So the sliding landscape also add to the sense of monotony. His shirts and pants are soggy, and his black raincoat stained with mud, and his bag stuffed with books is falling apart. Now the poet makes us know that it was a rainy day. And during the rainy day, the pathetic condition of the poet's father gets worse. It worsens because during these days his clothes are all wet, all soggy. His black raincoat is stained. It has become dirty. It becomes dirty because of the mud, because of the stains of mud. The color of the raincoat itself suggests how painful, how dull, how colorless the life of the father of the poet is. The dark color of the raincoat suggests the darker side of the father's life, the colorless life of the father, the monotonous life, the mundane life of the poet's father. Again, his bag is stuffed with books. And the books suggest, perhaps they indicate that he is not a common person. He is a learned man, and he carries those books with him. Perhaps there is another side also. He carries those books, his bag is stuffed, his bag is filled with the books. It indicates perhaps that he brings his work home also. As he is unable to complete his work in the office, he brings his work to home so that he may complete his work at home. It indicates he has to work at home also. It indicates the bag stuffed with books indicates that he brings his work to home also. His eyes dimmed by age fade homeward through the humid monsoon night. Now the poet gives us an impression of his father's age. His eyesight is dimmed by his old age. His eyesight has become weak by his old age, and the father looks homeward with his low vision through the humid monsoon night. The monsoon night is not a cheerful night. It is humid, it is gloomy, and the gloomy atmosphere also adds to the dullness of his father's life. Now I can see him getting off the train like a word dropped from a long sentence. The poet's father gets down from the train. Here in these lines, the poet has used a very fine example of simile. He compares his father to an unimportant word in a long sentence. If we drop an unimportant word from a long sentence, the sentence does not get affected. If you remove an unimportant word from a long sentence, the meaning of the sentence is not affected. The meaning does not change. In the same way, the father who gets off the train, The rest of the crowd, the rest of the world is not affected. The rest of the people in the train are not affected. The poet indicates how unimportant his father is to the crowd in the train. It does not really make any difference whether he got down or not, whether his father got down or not. He is not that relevant to the rest of the world. He is not as important as we think to the rest of the world. He is totally unimportant. He is totally negligible to the rest of the world, to the crowd in the train. He hurries across the length of the grey platform, crosses the railway line, enters the lane. His chappals are sticky with mud, but he hurries onward. After getting off the train, the father hurries onward his home. He wants to reach his home early. He crosses the grey platform and the railway line and finally enters the lane. Lane means the way, the path that leads to his home. The poet has used the words grey platform. Grey symbolizes the old age, and the poet wants to suggest, perhaps the poet wants to suggest the platform was very old. Grey platform means the platform was very old. Another meaning that the poet wants to suggest is the age of his father, the old age of his father. And his father's eyesight is not so good. To his weak eyesight, to his low vision, the color, the platform looks to be grey. It seems to be grey. Here the poet wants to suggest the old age of his father, and the father hurries home. His sticky with mud chappals also do not stop him from hurrying onward, from going onward. His sticky chappals with mud also do not prevent him from hurrying onward, from going onward. Why? Is it the love for his family? Is someone waiting for him in the family? No. The things are different. He hurries. He wants to reach his home early, not because someone is waiting there to welcome him warmly. He hurries not because someone is there who cares for him at his family, but he wants to escape. He hurries because he wants to escape. He wants to get rid of the dull, humid atmosphere. He wants to escape from the dull, humid atmosphere. He wants to escape from the grey platform, the muddy streets, where there is no one to take care of him, where there is no one to talk to him. The poet purposefully uses the word hurries 2 times in these lines, and this shows how intensely he wants to get rid of all these things, how intensely he wants to escape from the muddy streets, the grey platform, the dull, humid atmosphere. He thinks at least at home he will find some solace. At least in home he will find some peace, or he will find some rest, and that's why he wants to reach home early. Home again, I see him drinking weak tea, eating a stale chapati, reading a book. The second stanza of the poem, Father Returning Home, begins here. And in this stanza, the poet depicts the isolation of his father in his own home. The isolation of his father in his own home. He gets the feeling of isolation in his own home. He does not have the sense of familiarity in his own home. The poet sees his father reach home again like the other days. Then he sees him drinking weak tea and eating stale chapati. It is not the strong tea, it is not the fresh chapati. He has to drink the weak tea. He has to eat the stale chapati. The poet hints at, the poet shows how nobody cares for him even at home. Even at his own home also, nobody cares. Nobody talks with him. But the man does not have any complaints with his tea or food, as he is used to it. as he has become habitual of it. He does not complain about the tea, he does not complain about the stale chapati, because it has become the habit of him eating stale chapati and drinking weak tea. As we see, he rather concentrates on reading a book while having his tea. He neglects all those things and he rather concentrates, he rather keeps himself busy in reading a book while drinking the tea. He has probably given up expecting more care, more love from his family members. He goes into the toilet to contemplate man's estrangement from a man-made world. Man's estrangement from a man-made world. Estrangement means being unfriendly. This is the central theme of the poem. This is the central idea of the poem. This is the most important theme of the poem. Now the speaker's father, now the poet's father goes into the toilet with a thought of how men become isolated from the man-made world. He wonders, how is it possible? He cannot believe, how is it possible that man can be so isolated while the world, the city, the family is the creation of man himself. He has the feeling of estrangement, living in society, living among the people, living in his own family. He feels isolated, and this line, the line man's estrangement from a man-made world, nearly sums up the theme of the entire poem. The father is indeed aware of his estranged situation and hopes to find some support in the family when he hurries onward to his home. But actually, this does not take place. But the hope is diminished. He loses the hope as he reaches and finds the same indifference there. The family members also seem to be indifferent. They do not have any kind of attachment. They do not show any kind of affection, love, or eagerness to meet the father. Moreover, the toilet might act as a symbol of how small his world has been. The world of his father, the poet's father, has been very small, and this is symbolized by the toilet. The toilet seems to be the only place that the man has to go to contemplate over his loneliness. He goes there to find some peace and to contemplate about this situation, how the people, how the family members also can be so indifferent while behaving with him, how they are busy, how they do not find any kind of attachment there. And that's why to contemplate on this situation, he goes into the toilet. Coming out, he trembles at the sink, the cold water running over his brown hands. Brown hands symbolize the old age. Brown hands symbolize the old age. The father of the poet comes out of the toilet and he goes to wash his hands at the wash basin. And at that time the poet observes, the poet sees that the hands of his father are trembling. Why? They are trembling because of his old age, or they may be trembling because of the coldness of the water, or the feeling, the fearful thought of his own isolation from the rest of the world, the fearful thought of his own isolation from his own family might be responsible for the trembling of his hands. The thought of estrangement in the man-made world, the fearful thought of estrangement in his own family also is responsible for the trembling of his hands. A few droplets cling to the graying hairs on his wrists. A few droplets of water clinging to the gray hairs on his wrist may have some greater implication. Water generally symbolizes life, and gray hairs stand for the old age. So, the old man's life is just holding on to his old age. This life has no significance to anyone else. This life has no significance to the members of his family and to the rest of the world also. His sullen children have often refused to share jokes and secrets with him. Now the poet goes on to talk about the old man's relationship to his family members. And his bad-tempered, sullen means bad-tempered. His bad-tempered children refuse to share jokes and secrets with him. They do not share their private things. They do not share their happy moments with their own father. It shows that they don't share a close relationship. They don't have a close relationship, a friendly association with their own father. Rather, they regard him as an outdated, unwanted burden, though he is the sole earner of bread of his family, though he seems to be the only earning member of their family. He will now go to sleep listening to the static on the radio, dreaming of his ancestors and grandchildren, thinking of nomads entering a subcontinent through a narrow pass. Now we are in the final stage of the poem, and here we see the father of the poet going to sleep listening to radio and thinking of many things like his ancestors, his grandchildren, and he thinks about the Aryans also, means the nomads also. Nomads or the Aryans are the people who entered India through the narrow Khyber Pass in ancient times. The sound of the radio is even noisy and static. The sound of the radio is not melodious sound, it is static, it is noisy, and it gives another reference to the old man's miserable life, to the old man's sorrowful life. However, his dreaming of his ancestors and grandchildren gives the impression that he finds some solace, he finds some peace of mind in thinking about his past and future generations. It is an attempt, in fact, it is an attempt to escape from his mundane routine life, his monotonous routine life, which lacks any kind of human contact, where there is no human contact, where people do not converse, there is no conversation among the people, and he wants to escape thinking about his past and about his future. Again, his thought of the Aryans, again his thought of the nomads may indicate that he is thinking of how the society has changed since the ancient times, how the society, how the people have changed since the entry of the nomads, since the entry of the Aryans in the Indian subcontinent. Now there is no place in this modern world, there is no place for the aged, there is no place for the old age people, there is no place for the elderly people, and there is no one to think about their loneliness. There is no one in this modern world, there is no one to think about, to care about, to love the old people, to ask their difficulties, to try to meet their difficulties. The last part of the poem also conveys us an overwhelming sense of sordidness, an overwhelming sense of bleakness in the life of old person, that is the life of the father of the poet. There seems to be no route to escape for this unfortunate character, except it seems in the inner recesses of his own mind, where he can dream himself away from the present time into the refuge of the far past or the distant future with his ancestors and his grandchildren. The past is gone now. It means that there is no need to worry about the past. The future is yet to come, but he cannot bear the loneliness, the harsh situation, the harsh loneliness, the estrangement in the man-made world in the present time. And that's why he finds one way to escape from this sordid situation, that is dreaming about the past and dreaming about his grandchildren, dreaming about his future time. The poem thus shows the contrast between this man's frail and shabby exterior and the rich, teeming inner life that still pulses within him. He fears, at one side he fears, he tries to run away from the reality of life, but the other side Still the pulses, the throbbing heart is there, which wills, which is willing to live, which is willing to face the difficult situations of life and continue his life. Despite all the setbacks in life, it seems that his mind is unconquerable. His mind is never to be conquered. In fact, the final image of the poem is that of conquerors. When the poet speaks of how his father goes off to sleep thinking of nomads entering a subcontinent through the narrow pass, as this man dreams of these hordes of ancient invaders of India coming down through the Khyber Pass, his rich, romantic inner life is what continues to sustain him through his uninspiring day-to-day existence in the modern world. Still, it means that we can conclude, still this old man, even after facing the hardships of life, even after facing the loneliness in this man-made world, still he wills to continue his life, and that's why he remembers his ancient ancestors, he remembers the nomads, he remembers the Aryans. They also entered, and while entered they also faced a lot of hardships, but they did not run away from their hardships. Thus, the poem Father Returning Home by Dilip Chitre sympathizes with the old neglected people in our society. The poem sympathizes with the old neglected people in our society. No doubt, his message is well delivered here. This poem has given the poet a lot of respect and popularity through all these years. So we can say that this poem, though it is gloomy in tone, the poem has given a lot of popularity to this poet. So friends, I hope that you have understood the poem. We have had a very detailed analysis of the poem. Though the poem is full of symbolism, you watch the video again and again, you go through the poem again and again, and you try to find out the exact meaning, the exact idea that the poet wants to convey us through the use of symbolism. Friends, we have studied almost all the poems, we have completed almost all the poems. If you haven't gone through other poems, if you haven't watched the videos that are prepared on the other poems, you go to the description box given below. The links of all the poems are given there. You watch those videos, and I hope that you will understand each and every poem, because I have tried my level best to explain, to give the detailed analysis of each and every poem. In the next video, we will deal with the last poem of the 12th standard, and till then, bye.